Okay, I am going to kick us off and folks can join as they pop in. First of all, I want to apologize. My camera on my computer isn't working today, so you are just going to have a photograph of me for now. So apologies on the technical difficulties. My name is Stephanie Foner, and I work on the Affinity and Domestic Engagement team in alumni relations here at Northeastern. And I bring unique and exciting and engaging programs such as this one to the Northeastern community. I am so thrilled to have you all joining us here today for this very special event. So just first, a couple housekeeping items. Please be sure to stay muted throughout the duration of the event just to maintain the sound quality. There will be time at the end of the talk for questions and answers. So please get your questions ready, put them in the chat box. If you have questions during the presentation that you don't want to forget, go ahead, put them in the chat box and I'll read them at the end. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the event. So if you're having any technical difficulties or any issues, please feel free to send me a direct message. Automated transcription services are available during the event if needed. You can hide or show subtitles or the live transcription panel via the CC Live button in the bottom toolbar. And then lastly, this event is being recorded. I'll be circulating this event recording as well as the recording from the event last week by the end of this week. So stay tuned for that. Okay, we are very lucky today to have the expertise of Professor Xavier Costa. Professor Costa was the founding dean of Northeastern's College of Arts, Media, and Design in 2010. He teaches courses including modern architecture, architectural history, design tactics and operations, and of course leads the dialogue of civilization, art, architecture, and photography in Barcelona. As a world-renowned architect, Dr. Costa has lent his expertise to universities, foundations, and museums around the world. Currently, Dr. Costa serves as a council member of the Academia Europea in London and has acted as advisor to the Aga Khan Foundation in Geneva and the Pritzker Award in Chicago. And now it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Professor Costa.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you all of you for being here today in this brief presentation of our dialogue of civilization. I would like to briefly explain what these dialogues are, how our students at Northeastern benefit from these programs, and then also to introduce you to the contents of our dialogue, which is focused mostly on the city of Barcelona, guide you through the kind of contents that we have, that we offer to our students, and then finalize with some samples of our student work, which I think is probably the most exciting part of our program. So as Stephanie introduced me, I'm an architect, an architectural scholar, originally from Barcelona. This is one of the reasons why I have been leading this program. And let me tell you about the Dialogues of Civilization, which I think is a very unique program at Northeastern University. It is a relatively young program. It was introduced by our present president, Joseph Aoun. And the intention here was to offer to students the possibility of using some of their summertime to carry some courses in different locations across the world. So right now there's a large number. There are, I think, in the range of 70 or 80 different dialogues in all parts of the world, mostly happening during the summer. And this is a great opportunity for students to spend some time in a different location, while at the same time continuing with their undergraduate or graduate education. The spirit of the dialogue is that 2 courses, that means it's equivalent to half a semester, 2 full courses are offered in this different location, and they take advantage of being located in that particular place, interacting with some guest participants or some activities that take place. So in that sense, this is a way of continuing Northeastern's concept of experiential education, right? An education that is hands-on, an education that benefits from being off campus and interacting with professionals, with scholars, with all kinds of organizations in different locations. So the Barcelona program is one of these. It was started back in 2015, and we wanted to open up this fascinating city of Barcelona to our students and to focus on 3 particular themes. So our dialogue is an introduction to the art, the architecture, and also to photography in the city. Let me explain this a little bit. Of course, Barcelona is known for the richness of its architecture and its urban design, both historically, having great examples from classical times, from medieval times, but also from recent times. So we offer this introduction to the urbanism and architectural design. Barcelona is also very rich particularly in contemporary art. So as I will show you, we introduce our students to some of the great work of local artists like Picasso, like Miro, like Dali, and others. But then we also use photography as a tool to explore the city, to document the city, so that students in a way build their own narrative. They get introduced to let's say, professional level photography, but at the same time, they use this introduction to photography to build their own portfolio, to learn how to communicate visually. So in a way, the dialogue is covering different goals at the same time. Now, this has to do with the structure of the program itself. So the faculty, it's
look at buildings.
So we are 2 faculty members. One is Professor Tony Luong, who is actually a professional photographer. He's also teaching photography courses at Northeastern, and myself. So we are offering 2 courses. Professor Tony Luong offers this introduction to photography. I offer the introduction to the art and architecture of Barcelona. Our program takes place mostly in Barcelona, but we spend a few days in Madrid, taking advantage of the great resources of the city. And then we have also a couple of field trips to the city of Toledo, which is nearby Madrid, and also to the city of Figueras, nearby Barcelona. That's where the Salvador Dalí Foundation is located. Let me mention that dialogues take approximately 1 month. Ours tends to run from mid-May until mid-June. So it begins shortly after the end of the academic year. And in that sense, that works well for our students. So let me tell you a little bit about the contents of our program, what we show our students. So certainly we introduce the city of Barcelona, which is, I see it as a great case study to understand the European city in general, right? Because it's a city that was founded in Roman times, like many other cities in Europe. It has a very important medieval center that has been preserved to a very large extent, and which allows us to understand how cities evolved during the long period of the Middle Ages, right? It's over 1,000 years. So in fact, it's a great testimony to that period of time and how European cities evolved. But then, so actually in this floor plan that I have here, the medieval center is this kind of darker area in the lower left side of the image. But then we have this large grid, which reminds us of other cities like New York or like Philadelphia in the United States, which is the industrial city. Barcelona had a very important industrial period in the 19th century. It was a period of splendor economically, but also in terms of urban development. And that is what this very large area with this very uniform geometric grid is showing us. So it was precisely in this in this period of time of industrialization, when Barcelona was able to develop an architecture that is particularly rich and was leading the design tendencies in Europe. That's when important buildings like the Sagrada Familia, this important church by Antoni Gaudí, was started to be built. It's still being completed right now, almost 100 years later. But this is one of the many examples of the great architecture of that period of time. So architecture very often is an expression of the society of its time. It's an expression of not only the taste, but also the economy, the desire to be represented through architecture. And the work of Antoni Gaudí is one of the great examples that we visit. Not only buildings, but even areas like Park Güell, which we also visit, is a very interesting example of an early garden city that was intended to be built in the outskirts of Barcelona. But we have other examples. We have avant-garde architecture from the 20th century, like the work of Mies van der Rohe, one of the leading European architects, who in 1929 designed this pioneering work of modern design, the German pavilion for the international exhibition in Barcelona. But in addition to this introduction to the architecture and urban design of the city, we also pay attention to the great art that has emerged from Barcelona. One of the great figures certainly is Pablo Picasso, who from his childhood until his mid-20s lived in Barcelona. That's where he developed his interest in art and his also his connection to other artists, to the art milieu of that period of time. Then he moved to Paris and developed the rest of his career, mostly in France. But we have an introduction to Picasso because there is an important Picasso museum in Barcelona. And it also provides the context to understand the emergence of Cubism, the emergence of the great art of Picasso in the 20th century. When we are in Madrid, we also get to visit actually probably the most important work by Picasso, which is this large canvas, Guernica, that he painted during the Civil War in Spain, and now can be visited at the Reina Sofia Art Center. So our visit in Madrid allows us to benefit from the Prado Museum, where we see the classical work of Spanish painting, but also the more recent examples like this particular example. But we focus on other artists like Joan Miró, one of the great surrealist artists emerging from Spain, because there is a Miró Foundation that he himself established at the end of his life. So it is a very privileged place to understand his work, to look at the permanent collection, and also other works in Barcelona. The same with Salvador Dalí, another great figure of the 20th century, also emerging from Barcelona, from the Barcelona region. And as I mentioned, we traveled to Figueras, a town not far from Barcelona, where he also wanted to have this Dalí, he called it Theater Museum, and that's an incredible resource that we can visit on site. So some images of our activities. Actually, this is the Miró Foundation I just mentioned with our students. Most of these visits have a special guide that we incorporate to our program that is introducing our students to those visits, both in this kind of site, but also during our field trips. This is an interesting place, the Miralles Foundation. It is a foundation established by some architects in Barcelona, and we use some of the great spaces that they have for our photography workshop. Another image of the group during some of these field trips. This is our visit to Toledo, which is about 1 hour from Madrid, and we can see great work by, for instance, El Greco, who is one of the great artists from the Baroque period. He has very special work in Toledo. We can also see the city of Toledo, which is very well preserved, as also as a medieval town, and this particularly singular architectural artifact, which is the Toledo Cathedral, which happens to be the largest Gothic cathedral in Spain. Let me also tell you about what our students do. So certainly our students participate in all these different activities. We have guest lecturers. We have, as I mentioned, all kinds of site visits. They follow, however, these rigorous courses. They have to prepare presentations, to write papers. So, of course, the academic activity continues in addition to being in the city of Barcelona. Particularly important for us is the photography workshop. As I mentioned, Professor Tony Luong teaches this workshop. Students usually come with little background in photography. We don't require any particular prerequisite. So they are introduced to the use of a professional camera. They are introduced to the use of software to work with photographic images. And they are introduced to also to building narratives through photography. So in fact, nowadays we all use photography. It's very valuable to have this more rigorous introduction to the production of images. So students produce their own portfolio during our dialogue during this month. And we have several themes that we encourage students to pursue. There are images that focus on the city, on the representation of the city. This is one of our students' work. It's a view of the city of Barcelona from the Miró Foundation. But we see this, this very interesting way of introducing these children that represent the moment of gazing, the moment of looking, contemplating the city itself. But we also encourage them to capture the city environment, right? The urban environment, not only let's say the physical architecture, but what's going on public spaces, what is going on streets. And it's very interesting how they are able to capture these moments that encapsulate, right, the different activities occurring in the city with this kind of daily moments, right, or daily events that they manage to capture with their photographic images. So the emphasis is not only on capturing buildings or capturing urban spaces, but also capturing people, identifying what's happening in the city, what kind of urban scenes there are. And we find it fascinating how they manage to explore the city, to understand the complexity of the city and urban life through all kinds of images. Like there is a certain section which has to do with shops and commercial spaces, and how the commercial space is seen from the street, and how people interact with this particular site. So these are very modest locations. Of course, they are not just focused on monumental sites, but they manage to grasp this kind of daily life, this average life in the city itself. But we also have more focused architectural photography, because it's part of our contents. So students can also produce some images that are more architecturally focused. So there is a diversity of themes, and I find that Professor Luong, in this sense, is able to open up a range of directions for students to explore in their use of photography. So of course, there are many images that come from this workshop. The way this develops is that students produce their work, some of them in teams, others individually. Then we have the workshop when they present what they are working on, we discuss it, we might give suggestions. There's also a very important work that it's not immediately visible. There is a work done with photography software. So students have to learn how to shape the light, how to shape color, how to balance all these different visual elements. So in fact, these are photographs that, considering that they are just starting to use this kind of a high quality camera, are very sophisticated in their photographic quality. So in that sense, there is a a lot of work that is not immediately visible in the images that happens behind the scenes. Then at the end of the dialogue, we have a final presentation where students present their different portfolios, a selection of images, and we have these reviews inviting some professional photographers from the city or some other guest reviewers. So we have this open discussion about their work, about understanding how they translated their intentions into particular images. So in fact, I think it's a fascinating process of not only producing the image, but also having to discuss the intentions, the contents, answer possible questions and criticisms. This in particular is an image of the German pavilion designed by Mies van der Rohe that I introduced before. Another category of images are portraits. So students go from capturing buildings to capturing those urban situations, but also being able to capture, let's say, the human expression, right? In fact, this was an exercise where students had to take photographs of each other and had to capture, a certain moment, a certain expression among themselves. So that's a different, of course, it's a different complexity, it's a different category of photography. And I think this is a funny image on the beach, because we also worked on night photography. So night photography has a series of requirements of its own, given the light quality and given other conditions that have to be taken into consideration. So this is it's a real photograph. This is not Photoshopped, right? Where students have, using their phones, using the light in their phone, they produce these different letters, and then the image captures the superimposition of these different movements. So I just want to finish with a group image, because as I said, in the end, what is really important is our students, their involvement in the program, the fact that this is an experience that is quite unique. I always stress the fact that our program, like I think practically all the other dialogues, are open to all students. So students from any major, from any department or any college across the university come to our program. And actually, we have more students from other areas than students from the School of Architecture or from the photography program, because this is more at an introductory level. So what we find fascinating is that students coming from every single field in the university are together for a month, and they are living, let's say, 24/7, right, together as a group, which is a unique experience. But I also realized that very often students who are in a given major do not necessarily interact much with students in other, in very different fields. So this is a unique opportunity especially during the college years, for students to come to meet students from other fields. And I think that this brings a special richness to the program and to the outcomes as well. Again, the dialogue is also an experience, or it's experiential learning at different levels. Students have to be together, they organize themselves, they go out after, when we finish our activities and our classes on their own, they explore the city in many other ways. So in fact, it's very different from the usual campus life. And even though we focus on the academic content and teaching these particular courses, we are fascinated by, let's say, the wealth of experiences that our students are exposed to. So in that sense, I think that the dialogues are a unique kind of activity. I don't know of other universities that would have this wide range of offerings, and this combination of visiting and living in a different location with also continuing with your courses and gaining credits towards your degree. So I think I'm going to finish with this image. This is from 2 years ago, because unfortunately we have not been able to continue with our dialogues these past 2 years because of all the travel restrictions. obviously. We are all set, however, to restart the program this coming summer, this coming month of May. So in fact, for me, it's a pleasure to share the experience of this program with all of you as we are preparing, as we are getting ready for a new edition in 2022. So thank you all for your attention and your participation. And I understand that if there are any questions, Stephanie will gather them, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So I did get a couple private questions that I'm going to start off with, and then looks like there's another question in the public chat box. But I did receive a question about how the modern city of Barcelona, the modern architecture, has been built up around some of the more traditional elements, and wondering if you could give a little bit of a history of that process.
Right. Well, that's a great question, because Barcelona has become, in recent decades, a special laboratory for new architecture and new urban design. And there's been a certain, let's say, trust that the quality of architecture and urban design can be decisive for the quality of a city, the quality of urban life. More recently, also connected with questions of sustainable design and understanding how our cities will be changing towards the future. I would say that a special trait of Barcelona has been not only this attention to architecture and commissioning great architects from all over the world to come to the city and contribute with their designs, but there's been particularly an attention to public space. So it's not just singular buildings that might be especially interesting or qualified in their design, but understanding that the city is also shaped through its wide range of public spaces, the qualities of squares and streets and avenues and beachfronts and so on. And in that sense, Barcelona has been pioneering an effort to, let's say, to take great architectural design into urban spaces. And I think that this has translated into a high quality of urban life, even in relatively modest or small urban spaces. And I would say this is one of the traits. And following the question, this is what allows us to connect and reconcile contemporary design with those historical examples that we have inherited from medieval times or from the 19th century. But they all come together because of the quality of urban space. That would be my answer to what is a very interesting question.
And what would you say particularly or especially distinguishes Barcelona's architecture from some of the other great European cities' architectures?
Right. Well, for one thing, the city has been able to keep these great examples from all different periods, right? So we have the Roman city, which is still quite visible and quite preserved. We have a great medieval center, as I mentioned. We have a great 19th century city. Probably the best known examples, and most of the visitors who come to Barcelona are attracted by the work of Gaudí and other contemporary architects from the turn of the century, right? What usually we call Art Nouveau or Modernisme, which is an architecture that is particularly rich in its use of materials, in its craftsmanship, in the quality of its finishings, that is very innovative for its time. And that has to do with that moment of splendor when Barcelona was, in fact, an important industrial center. And it was industry that invested in this architecture. One could say that there was a new social class, the industrialized bourgeoisie, that was becoming powerful and influential at that time. And this new social class saw architecture as the best expression of their status and their role in that society. So it was a time when probably it doesn't happen anymore at that level, it was a time when architecture was seen as the best expression of a certain social class or a certain society or a certain set of values. That's why it's so unique to the architecture of that period, and the fact that there is such an abundance and such a high quality during that period of time. So it's roughly from the late 19th century until the 1910s, 1920s. You know, there are several decades that produced an amazing architecture. What we have in more recent times is a new period that starts in the 1980s all the way to the present time. And this has to do with the political change in Spain. As you know, Spain had a civil war, then it had suffered a period of dictatorship, and democracy was reintroduced in the 1980s. And this produced a sense that this was a historical turning point, that a new era was beginning with the reestablishment of democracy. There was so much excitement and so much optimism about the future that the city decided to initiate a very ambitious plan of rebuilding itself. That was the term that was used. And as you know, it coincided with the awarding of the Olympic Games, which was a very important phenomenon. That was back in 1992. So in fact, the Olympic Games, which very often do not have such a great impact in the cities that organize them. I mean, we remember that Boston declined not long ago to organize them because they thought it was too costly and not much would be gained. But Barcelona saw the Olympic Games actually as an opportunity to project itself to the world, to be better known. So they thought it was a great investment. And of course, the Olympic Games carried a certain set of investments in infrastructure, not only the sports facilities of the games, but the city saw it as an opportunity to build quite a number of important infrastructures that were made possible by the games themselves. So at that moment in time, that was particularly important, and this gave great visibility to these new designs that were developed in the city.
I have a very specific question. So from someone in our audience who visited La Sagrada Familia 10 years ago and would love an update on what is going on. And maybe you could give a little bit of history for those who are unfamiliar with the long process of building this beautiful building.
Right. Well, the Sagrada Familia, I showed that aerial image, right, of the building. I mean, it's beginning to look like one of those medieval cathedrals that would take centuries to build. So it was started over 100 years ago, and Gaudi, who was one could say, visionary architect, but he came up with a design that was almost impossible to finish, certainly during his lifetime. So the construction of the Sagrada Familia has found many challenges. One of the main ones is the financial one, right? How to finance this basilica, which actually it's not owned by the church. It's a project that was started by the Society of Barcelona as a city. So it has been dragging for many decades. It got some momentum in recent times, following what I was describing, right? That Barcelona was initiating a new era of growth and reconstruction. And certainly the Sagrada Familia was one of the symbols of the great architecture of the city. I have to say that there have been some technical improvements, particularly computer-aided design, that has facilitated greatly the design and the construction of the building, which originally depended on basically stone masonry and stone craftsmanship, which was extremely time-consuming. And now with computer-aided design, it has become faster and also less costly to develop it. And also the success of the Sagrada Familia is one of I think it's the most visited site in Spain and one of the most visited sites in Europe and probably in the world. This has brought also an important revenue that has allowed the construction to move on. So there was I think there was a goal to complete it in 2026, but now COVID has delayed things because in fact the building has been closed to visitors for some time. But let's hope that now it will continue to move on. So that there is some light at the end of the tunnel in this process, let's say.
Oh, so there's a public chat box question, what the cost of the program is for students?
Right. So the cost of the program is basically students pay tuition for 2 courses. So it would be the equivalent of, as I said, of half a semester. There is no difference whether you're taking this course on campus or you're taking, in this case, in Barcelona. And then there is a fee that covers housing, that covers all the costs, transportation, all the costs related to the program, which I think is in the range of $2,500, which I think is very reasonable because that's, just the cost of housing for a month easily gets close to that level. So in fact, I would say the most important cost is the tuition. Of course, if students have tuition aid, they can also benefit from that. And then there is this additional fee that basically allows them to pay for living abroad during that period of time. This is a cost that actually is very similar across all dialogues because they all have the same length. And in the end, these kind of costs are comparable in different places.
Okay. Who are some current architects who you see pioneering and moving Spanish architecture forward?
Well, I mentioned that we are using the Miralles Foundation, which is actually it's a large building that is used as the architectural studio for the Miralles architectural office, and they would be a great example of this contemporary design. By being there, we also benefit that we are offered a tour of the facilities. We get to invite some of the architects to participate in our activities or in our reviews. So I would say Miralles would be one of these great present-day architects, but there is a great generation of young designers that is, following this period of supporting architecture and supporting urban design that have been benefiting from this process.
Okay, this comes up has come up in many of these presentations, but what are some hidden gems or some off the beaten path recommendations for someone who is traveling to Barcelona for the first time?
Well, I mean, there is certainly there is plenty to see. I would recommend this. There is what sometimes is called the Salvador Dalí tour. So Salvador Dalí is, of course, one of the great figures of 20th century art. He spent quite a number of years living in New York City, but the rest of the time he was living in nearby Barcelona, and he left several places that he created as, also as his own vision and his own design that are fascinating. One of them is the one I mentioned in the town of Figueras, which is his theater museum. And in fact, the name itself is quite interesting because he bought, at the end of his life, he bought the local theater in the town of Figueras, because as a kid, he used to say that as a kid, he would go to that theater to see his first movies, and he fell in love with that theater. So at the end of his life, he decided to buy it and turn it into his own museum, but it's also his, it's also his grave. He's buried there. So it's a kind of very personal creation. And it's a fascinating, he designed the building or the reconstruction of the building. He designed the display of all those works. All the work is his. So it's a very unique and unusual creation. But they also have preserved his house in a beach town called Cadaqués. And it's a house that he built over decades. And it's also full of objects of himself. So it's a great introduction to his world, to his this kind of dreamy world of his. And then there is a third place, which is a castle that he bought for his wife, Gala, who was a very important person in his life. And she had also this whimsical desire to have a palace for herself, as if she were some kind of present-day queen. And he also did that. So there are these three sites which you can visit in one day. Let's say you have to drive around, but they are all nearby. And it's a fascinating introduction to Dali, because usually we see his paintings, we see his artwork, but this is an introduction to his universe, let's say. I think that's a fascinating visit that you can do from Barcelona in about one day. And we usually see two of these three places. We might add the third one maybe in our next dialogues.
Would you say that, not sure if this is the right term, those local to Barcelona, those from Barcelona, are as sort of impressed on a regular basis with the amazing architecture that surrounds their everyday lives, or you see mainly tourists who are standing in front of these buildings in awe?
Well, some of these sites certainly have become very big tourist destinations, like Sagrada Familia. But I would say that I think it's an interesting question, because in Barcelona there is a special pride about the architecture and the urban design being a great value of the city. And I think this is one of the great successes of the city, that not only it has managed to invest in these architectural developments, but it has been able to communicate and to make sure that the whole city participates and feels part of this process, so that the whole city sees this great architecture as a kind of shared patrimony, as a shared possession, and there is a sense of pride and a sense of identity that is very reinforced by this architecture. So it's a case where architecture not only fulfills the function of providing whatever spaces are necessary with equality of design, but in a way it becomes part of the character and the identity of that community, and that's a great achievement.
So I have one more privately sent question. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to send them either directly to me, or you can put them in the chat box. But this last question that I've received is that as someone who is obviously very well traveled and has a very international knowledge of architecture, what other cities are some of your favorites to visit for their architecture?
Well, I mean, I'm probably a bit partial about some European cities, because European cities have accumulated this great production from over time. So, I mean, of course, I'm also in love with American cities, but there is a historical dimension to European cities that definitely is very special and very unique. If you look for for an architectural quality and architectural contents. So definitely I would be in favor of many European cities. I think countries like Italy or France or Britain have an incredible heritage. I find, I mean, probably because I'm from Barcelona, I find Mediterranean cities to have a set of common qualities, in the sense that these are dense cities, they are very sustainable cities, but they have been also careful about their heritage and about making the city livable while preserving, not preserving in the sense of freezing, but preserving in the sense of maintaining some qualities that have been made possible over the centuries. So I think that other Mediterranean cities in Spain, in Italy particularly, right? I mean, this is well known, but the urban quality of cities in Italy, not only the great cities like Rome or Florence, but even let's say, less known cities in Italy, like Genoa, like Bologna, like Turin, for instance, and many others, are cities of extraordinary quality of urban space, of architecture, and the same could be said about Spain or about other areas of Southern Europe. I mean, it would be endless to go through all the many cities, but I think that the American city is a different phenomenon that has its own it's fascinating in its own way. But some of the questions that we are discussing here about also learning about the historical evolution of cities, and why do we live in cities, and why are cities the environments that define our lives, can be particularly understood through some of these European examples.
Okay. All right. Well, that is all that I'm seeing on my end. Thank you so much, Professor Costa, for taking the time and sharing this information with us. And thank you all for joining us today. As I said, a recording of this presentation, as well as last week's presentation, will be circulated by the end of the week. We hope to see you either in person or at another virtual event soon. Take care.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, everyone.